On a cold winter night, a millionaire walks alone through the streets, crying after receiving the most devastating news of his life. When he stumbles and falls in the middle of the street, a little 5-year-old beggar girl approaches with an old torn blanket. "Sir, are you crying from the cold too? You can have my blanket. I know how bad it feels. I cry too, but then I'll find another one." The millionaire looks at this child who, despite having nothing, offers everything she has. What happens next is so unexpected that it leaves everyone at the scene in complete shock. The biting wind of the pre-dawn swept through the deserted streets of the upscale neighborhood like invisible blades, carrying with it the heavy silence that only the coldest nights can bring. Edward Montgomery walked along the empty sidewalks, his footsteps echoing against the imposing facades of the mansions he knew so well. Icy tears streamed down his face, mixing with the cold that bit at his skin, while his hands trembled, not just from the weather, but from the devastation consuming his chest. 3 hours had passed since he received the call from the hospital. 3 hours since his life shattered into irreparable fragments. Helena had not survived the surgical complications. His wife, his partner of 22 years, was gone forever, leaving only the echo of her laughter in the empty corridors of their mansion. Edward stumbled, lost in his grief, and collapsed onto the icy asphalt. His knee tore against the rough concrete, staining his expensive Italian suit with blood. He remained there, fallen in the middle of the deserted street, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness for the first time in decades. His fortune, his businesses, his empire built with such care, none of it mattered now. Nothing could fill the void Helena had left. "Sir, are you crying from the cold too?" The childish voice cut through the silence like a delicate bell, making Edward slowly lift his head. Before him stood a small girl, no more than 7 years old, wearing ragged clothes and an oversized coat that seemed to swallow her frail body. Her large, dark eyes sparkled with a wisdom disconcerting for her age. "You can have my blanket," she said, extending a faded blanket that was clearly her only protection against the harsh winter. "I know how bad it feels. I cry too, but then I manage." Edward froze, looking at the child offering her only source of warmth to a complete stranger. In his rational mind, he quickly processed the details. She was alone in the pre-dawn hours. Her clothes were inadequate for the cold, and there was a maturity in her gestures that shouldn't exist in someone so young. You shouldn't be out here alone," Edward murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Where are your parents?" The girl tilted her head, as if carefully considering her answer. "Grandma went to the hospital and didn't come back. But it's okay, I learned to take care of myself. Are you hurt, mister?" Edward looked at his bleeding knee, and then at the child who showed more concern for his well-being than her own. Something inside his chest, which had closed off like a wall since Helena's death, began to tremble. "Why would you help me?" he asked, genuinely confused. "You don't know me." "Because everyone needs help sometimes," she replied with devastating simplicity. "Grandma always said that when you share what you have, even if it's little, you feel less alone." Edward felt tears return, but now for a different reason. This child, who clearly had so little, was willing to give all she possessed to comfort a suffering stranger. He, with all his wealth and power, had never experienced such genuine generosity. "What's your name?" he asked, gently accepting the blanket from the girl's small hands. "Sophia," she replied, smiling for the first time. "And yours?" "Edward." He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, feeling not just physical warmth, but something deeper, a human connection he had forgotten was possible. "Sophia, would you like to spend this night somewhere warm? I know a hotel nearby where we can get a room." Sophia hesitated for a moment, studying Edward's face with those perceptive eyes. "You won't hurt me, will you?" "Never," Edward replied, and was surprised by the absolute sincerity in his own voice. "I promise." As they walked together through the icy streets towards the hotel, Edward couldn't stop looking at the girl beside him. In a single night, she had shown more compassion than he had witnessed in years of corporate meetings and social dinners. And as the faded blanket warmed his shoulders, a question hammered in his mind: who was really saving whom on that cold pre-dawn? The lobby of the Grand Regent Hotel was silent in the early hours, only illuminated by soft lights that created dancing shadows on the polished marble. Edward held Sophia's small hand as they approached the front desk, feeling the night clerk's curiosity at the unusual scene. A man in a torn and blood-stained suit, accompanied by a child in ragged clothes. "I need a suite for tonight," Edward said, his voice still thick with emotion, but with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being served without question. The receptionist, a middle-aged man named Roberto, immediately recognized Edward Montgomery from the financial papers. His eyes moved discreetly between the businessman and the girl, but his professionalism spoke louder than his curiosity. "Certainly, Mr. Montgomery. The presidential suite is available." As they ascended, in the mirrored elevator, Sophia observed everything with wide eyes. She had never been in such a luxurious place, where even the floor gleamed like still water. Edward noticed her astonishment and felt a pang of guilt, realizing how he had taken such small extravagances for granted his entire life. "It's very beautiful here," Sophia murmured, delicately touching the elevator wall as if it was something magical. The suite was larger than any space Sophia had ever slept in. Soft carpets covered the floor, heavy curtains blocked out the cold, and a fireplace crackled softly, spreading warmth throughout the room. But what caught the girl's attention most was the king-size bed, covered with white sheets that looked like clouds. "You can take a hot bath," Edward offered, pointing to the marble bathroom. "I'll order some clean clothes." Sophia hesitated at the bathroom door, turning back to him with a worried expression. "What if I fall asleep in the warm water and you leave?" The question hit Edward like a punch to the gut. This child had learned that people disappear, that security is temporary, that you can't fully trust anyone. He knelt to be at her eye level. "Sophia, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you come out of the bath, and I'll be here when you wake up tomorrow. You have my word." She studied his face for a long moment, as if reading the lines of his soul. Finally, she nodded and disappeared into the bathroom. Edward heard the sound of running water, and for the first time in hours, allowed himself a moment to process what was happening. He called room service, ordering children's clothes, food, and toiletries. While he waited, he walked to the panoramic window overlooking the sleeping city. Somewhere down there, in those cold streets, there were other children like Sophia. Other stories of abandonment and loneliness that he had never paused to consider. When Sophia emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a gigantic hotel bathrobe, her dark hair still dripping, Edward felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a protective instinct that went beyond logic or convenience. She seemed even smaller now, more fragile, but there was a dignity in her posture that impressed him. "The food will be here soon," he said. "You must be hungry." "A little," she admitted, climbing onto the armchair beside the fireplace. "Thank you for letting me take a hot bath. It's been a long time." "How long have you been on the streets, Sophia?" She counted on her small fingers, concentrating. 3 weeks, I think. Maybe 4. It's hard to count when every day's the same. "And before that, did you live with your grandma?" "Yes, in a small house near the market. She made homemade treats to sell, and I helped her wrap them. But then she started coughing a lot and got very weak. A man came and said she needed to go to the hospital." Edward felt his heart clench. "And you? Why didn't you go with her?" "They said kids couldn't stay at the hospital." "Grandma said it." would only be for a few days, that I could stay with the neighbor, but the neighbor moved the next day and I didn't know where to. The simplicity with which Sophia recounted her personal tragedy left Edward speechless. This girl had been abandoned by the system, forgotten by adults who should have protected her, and yet she maintained her capacity to care for others. Room service arrived with a tray laden with food, sandwiches, fruit, hot cocoa. Sophia ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a royal banquet. Edward barely ate, mesmerized by the silent gratitude in the girl's eyes. "Sophia," he said finally, "tomorrow we'll look for your grandma in the hospitals. We'll find out what happened to her." Sophia's face lit up with such pure hope that Edward felt his chest tighten. "Do you think she's still waiting for me?" "We'll find out together," he promised, desperately wishing their search would bring good news. Later, as Sophia slept soundly in the giant bed, Edward remained awake in the armchair, watching her. In a few short hours, this child had awakened something within him that he thought had died with Helena. For the first time since his wife's loss, Edward had a purpose beyond his own pain, but a question haunted him as the night progressed. What would happen when they found Sophia's grandma? And if she were, Edward pushed the dark thought away. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations, and he would face each one with the same courage a 7-year-old girl had shown by offering her only blanket to a suffering stranger. Morning arrived with a pale sun that barely managed to break through the dense winter clouds. Edward woke with a sore neck from sleeping in the armchair, but his eyes immediately went to the bed where Sophia still rested. She slept curled up like a kitten, hugging the pillow, and for the first time in weeks, she truly looked like a child. The phone rang softly, and Edward answered before it could wake Sophia. It was Mark, his personal assistant, his voice heavy with concern. "Edward, I heard about Helena. I'm so sorry. I've cancelled all your appointments for the week, but there are some urgent matters that need your attention." "Not now, Mark," Edward murmured, watching Sophia stir slightly. "I need to resolve a personal situation first." "Personal? Are you okay? Where did you spend the night? I tried calling several times." Edward hesitated. How could he explain that he had spent the night caring for a street girl he had met by chance? "I'm at the Grand Regent Hotel. I'm going to need your help with something different today." After a confused pause, Mark agreed. Edward asked him to arrange for good quality children's clothes, estimated for a 7-year-old girl, and to make a list of all the public and private hospitals in the city. When Sophia woke up, stretching like a lazy cat, her first gesture was to look for Edward with her eyes. The relief on her face when she saw him there was touching and painful at the same time. "Good morning, Sophia. Did you sleep well?" "It was the best night of my life," she said with absolute sincerity. The bed was like sleeping on a cloud. After breakfast, which Sophia savored as if every mouthful were a treasure, they headed to the first hospital on Edward's list. Sophia held his hand firmly, wearing a new pink outfit Mark had provided, but carrying her faded blanket on her free arm. "Why did you bring the blanket?" Edward asked as they walked through the parking lot. "To show Grandma," Sophia explained. "She'll be proud to know I helped someone." At St. Vincent's Hospital, the first on the list, the receptionist was polite but not very helpful. There were no records of any lady with the full name Sophia provided, Mary Grace Miller. Edward insisted on speaking with a supervisor and discovered that many emergency patients were registered only with partial names or nicknames. "Do you have a picture of her?" the supervisor asked gently. Sophia shook her head sadly. "We didn't have a camera, but I can draw her." To Edward's surprise, Sophia pulled a crumpled pencil from her pocket and began to draw on the back of a medical prescription paper. In a few minutes, she had created an impressively detailed portrait of an elderly lady, with soft wrinkles around kind eyes and grey hair tied in a bun. "My goodness," the supervisor murmured. "You have so much talent, dear. Let me show this." To the nurses in the inpatient ward. They waited for 20 minutes before the supervisor returned with a worried expression. None of the nurses recognized the woman in the drawing. At the second hospital, Central Hospital, the experience was similar. Huge lines, confusing bureaucracy, and no information about Mary Grace Miller. Sophia remained patient throughout the drawing portraits of her grandma on different papers she found, each one capturing details Edward hadn't noticed in the first drawing. "She liked to wear a flower brooch on her coat," Sophia explained, as she added details to a new drawing, "and she always smelled of cinnamon because of the treats she made." At the third hospital, Northside General Hospital, the receptionist immediately recognized Sophia's drawing. "That lady, yes, she was here, but she was transferred 2 weeks ago. Severe lung problem, if I recall correctly." Edward's heart leaped, and he saw Sophia's eyes light up with renewed hope. "Where was she transferred?" Edward asked anxiously. "Let me check. Yes. South Regional Hospital. They have a better-equipped ICU for respiratory cases." On the car ride to South Regional Hospital, Sophia chatted excitedly about how surprised Grandma would be to see her, about the new treats they could make together, about how she had learned to take care of herself. Edward smiled and nodded, but a growing worry gnawed at his stomach. At South Regional Hospital, the service was more efficient, but the news was devastating. Yes, Mary Grace Miller had been admitted there. Yes, she had repeatedly asked for her granddaughter Sophia, but she had been transferred again, this time to University Hospital, after complications in her condition. "Another transfer?" Edward asked, his voice laden with frustration. "Unfortunately, sir, our ICU was full. University Hospital has better resources for complex cases." Sophia remained optimistic throughout the explanation, but Edward noticed that she clutched the blanket to her chest with more force with each new piece of information. It was already mid-afternoon when they arrived at University Hospital. The building was imposing, modern, with state-of-the-art equipment visible through the glass windows. Edward felt hopeful. Surely here they would have definitive information about Sophia's grandma. At the reception, the attendant checked the system for long minutes before looking up with an expression Edward recognized immediately. It was the same expression the doctors had used when talking about Helena the night before. "Mr. Montgomery," she said softly, "I need you to speak with the hospital's social worker. There's information about the patient Mary Grace Miller that needs to be communicated personally." Edward felt the world sway around him. Sophia, still innocent, smiled at the receptionist and asked, "Which room is she in? Can I show her my drawing?" But Edward already knew from the attendant's tone and the careful expression on her face that their search had come to an end in a way that would change everything forever. The social worker's office was small and welcoming, with walls painted in soft tones and children's drawings taped to available surfaces. Dr. Carla Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind but tired eyes, gestured for Edward and Sophia to sit in the cushioned chairs in front of her desk. "Sophia, sweetie," Dr. Carla began softly, "do you remember me? I spoke with your grandma a few times when she was hospitalized here." Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Grandma talked about the doctor, said you were really nice. Where is she? Can I see her now?" Edward watched the social worker struggle with her words, and his heart broke in anticipation. He knew that expression, the same one he had seen on the faces of the doctors who had given him the news about Helena. "Sophia, I need to tell you something very important about your grandma," Dr. Carla continued, moving her chair closer to the girl. Your grandma was very, very sick when she arrived here. Her lungs couldn't work properly anymore. But the doctors cured her, right? Sophia asked, her voice still full of innocent hope. She always said doctors could fix anything. Edward closed his eyes for a moment, preparing to witness the moment Sophia's world would crumble, in the same way his had crumbled the night before. Sweetie, your grandma. She passed away 2 weeks ago. Her heart stopped beating and she went to eternal rest. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia blinked several times, as if processing the words in slow motion. Edward saw the exact moment comprehension hit her childish eyes. First confusion, then denial, and finally, her pain so pure that he had to look away. No, Sophia whispered, clutching the blanket to her chest. She said she'd come back. She promised. She wanted to come back very much, Sophia. In her last days, she spoke only of you. She kept asking if anyone had found you, if you were safe and warm. She called my name, Sophia asked, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. Many times. She asked me to tell you that she loved you more than all the stars in the sky and that you are the bravest, kindest girl she ever knew. Sophia finally broke down in tears, a deep, desperate sob that echoed through the walls of the small room. Edward didn't hesitate. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, letting her soak his shirt with the tears of a pain he understood perfectly. She won't make treats with me anymore, Sophia sobbed against his chest. She won't braid my hair in the morning anymore. No, sweetie, Edward murmured, his own tears silently streaming. But she left you with all the good memories and no one can take those away. Dr. Carla waited patiently for the initial shock of the news to pass before continuing. Sophia, there's one more thing. Your grandma left something for you. From her desk drawer, she pulled out a small wooden box decorated with hand-painted flowers. She made sure this reached you. With trembling hands, Sophia opened the box. Inside was a gold flower-shaped brooch, the same one she had drawn in her grandma's portraits, and a note written in shaky handwriting. Can you read it to me? Sophia asked Edward, her voice still thick. Edward picked up the yellowed paper and began to read. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, it's because I've gone to watch over the stars in heaven. Don't cry too much for me, because I'll always be looking out for you. Always be as kind as you are, help those in need, and remember that the love we share stays in our hearts forever. This brooch was my mother's, your great-grandma's, and now it's yours. When you miss me, hold it close to your heart and know I'm right there. I love you more than anything, my little granddaughter. Grandma Mary. Sophia held the brooch with reverent care, as if it were made of crystal. Can I put it on my blanket? Of course you can, Edward said, helping her pin the brooch to the faded fabric. Dr. Carla observed the interaction with professional interest. Mr. Montgomery, may I ask your relationship to Sophia? The question hit Edward like lightning. What was his relationship to her? 24 hours ago, they were complete strangers. Now, he felt responsible for her in a way he couldn't explain. We met last night, he admitted. Sophia helped me when I was going through a difficult time. I see. Dr. Carla made some notes. Sophia, do you have other relatives? Aunts, uncles, cousins, anyone in your family? Sophia shook her head. It was just me and Grandma. She always said our family was small, but full of love. In that case, we'll need to contact Child Protective Services. Sophia will need to stay in a temporary shelter until we can find a foster family. No, Sophia exclaimed, clinging to Edward's arm. I want to stay with Mr. Montgomery. He's nice. He took care of me. Edward felt his heart break again. In her desperate tears, Sophia had chosen him as her anchor in a world that had just completely crumbled. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Carla said, carefully, I understand you formed a bond, but there are legal procedures that must be followed. Sophia needs specialized care, therapy, a structured environment to process her loss. What if I want to be that environment? Edward heard himself say, surprising himself with the determination in his voice. What if I want to care for her? Sophia looked at him with eyes full of renewed hope, and Edward knew he had just made the most important decision of his life. But from the social worker's worried look, he realized that the journey to keep Sophia by his side would be far more complex than he imagined. Montgomery and Associates law firm occupied 3 entire floors of one of the most modern buildings in the financial district. Edward had built his legal empire on precision, strategy, and absolute control of every variable. But as he walked through the familiar corridors with Sophia by his side, he felt completely unprepared for the challenge that awaited him. Dr. Henry Castle, his partner and best friend for 15 years, received them in his office with poorly disguised concern. Henry knew Edward better than anyone. They had built the firm together, shared victories and defeats, and he knew his friend didn't make impulsive decisions. "Edward, my condolences for Helena," Henry said sincerely, then turned to Sophia with a gentle smile. "And you must be Sophia. Edward told me about you too." Sophia nodded shyly, still clutching the blanket with her grandma's brooch pinned to it. She had spoken very little since leaving the hospital, lost in a world of grief that Edward recognized intimately. "Henry, I need to know what the legal possibilities are for me to obtain custody of Sophia." Edward got straight to the point, as he always did in business. Henry sighed and gestured for them to sit. "Edward, you just lost your wife. You're grieving, making decisions based on emotion. The adoption process is complex, time-consuming, and—" "It's not emotion," Edward interrupted. "It's necessity. Sophia needs a family, and I need to care for her. But you have no experience with children. You've never expressed interest in adopting. The social workers will question your motivations, especially considering the unusual circumstances of how you met." Sophia looked up at Edward with small eyes, and he saw a silent fear in them, the fear of being abandoned again. "What are the requirements?" Edward asked, his voice taking on the professional tone he used in important negotiations. Henry opened a folder and began to list. "First, you need to register with the National Adoption System. Then undergo psychological evaluations, home visits, preparatory courses, financial assessments, though that's the least of your worries, and interviews with social workers." "How long does the whole process take?" "In normal cases, 6 months to 2 years, but your case isn't normal. Sophia isn't an infant available for adoption. She has a history, trauma, and you've already formed a bond outside the official system." Sophia tugged at Edward's sleeve. "Mr. Montgomery, what does all this mean?" Edward knelt beside her chair. "It means it's going to take a while before we can be a real family. But I won't give up, Sophia. I promise." Henry observed the interaction with professional interest. "Edward, I need you to understand something else. Child Protective Services has already been notified about Sophia's situation. They'll want to know where she spent the last 24 hours, why they weren't immediately informed about an unaccompanied child. I helped her. She was alone on the street, in the cold. I know that, but they might interpret it differently. A wealthy, recently widowed man finds a vulnerable child on the street and takes her to a hotel. Without context, it could seem—" "Stop," Edward said firmly. "Don't finish that sentence. I trust you, Edward, but the system doesn't know you like I do. They'll be skeptical, especially because you met under such unusual circumstances." Sophia began to draw on the back of a paper she found on Henry's desk. Her small hands moved the pencil with impressive precision, creating the face of a woman Edward recognized immediately. It was Helena, his late wife, based on the photos he had seen on Edward's desk. How did you... Edward began, astonished. I saw the picture on your desk when we came in, Sophia explained. She had beautiful eyes like yours when... You're not sad. Henry observed the drawing with admiration. She has exceptional talent. That might help the process. Children with special talents sometimes receive different consideration. I don't want her to be seen as a special case, Edward said. I want her to be seen as a child who deserves a family. Henry's phone rang, and he answered with an increasingly worried expression. After hanging up, he looked gravely at Edward. That was Dr. Carla Santos from the hospital. Child Protective Services wants to speak with you today. They're questioning why Sophia wasn't turned over to official care immediately. Sophia stopped drawing, her eyes filling with tears again. Are they going to take me away? Edward felt a growing fury in his chest. In less than 24 hours, Sophia had lost her grandma and now faced the possibility of being separated from the only person who showed genuine care for her. They won't, he said, his voice laden with determination. Henry, I want you to mobilize our entire team. I want the best family law specialist in this country. I want a full report on my rights and the legal options available. Edward, this is going to be a long and difficult battle. Then so be it. I've fought for much less in my life. Edward looked at Sophia, who had returned to drawing, this time sketching the three of them together in the lawyer's office. Some battles are worth any sacrifice. Henry nodded slowly. All right. But I need you to understand one thing. The system was created to protect children. They will scrutinize every aspect of your life, your motivations, your emotional stability. Are you prepared for that? Edward thought about the night before, when Sophia offered her only blanket to comfort a suffering stranger. He thought about the pure generosity of a child who had lost everything, but still found strength to care for others. I'm prepared for anything that means keeping Sophia safe and loved, Edward replied. The question is the system prepared to discover that sometimes the perfect family doesn't come in the traditional way? But even as he spoke with conviction, Edward couldn't ignore the tightness in his stomach. The meeting with Child Protective Services was scheduled for 2 hours from now, and he had a feeling his life was about to change in ways that not even his experience in complex negotiations had prepared him for. The Child Protective Services building contrasted drastically with the luxurious offices Edward was accustomed to. Peeling paint, worn furniture, and a faint smell of disinfectant barely disguised the reality of an overloaded and underfunded system. Sophia walked beside him, clutching his hand with increasing tightness as they approached the meeting room. Dr. Beatrice Almeida, a social worker with 12 years of experience, greeted them with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had seen many cases over the years: abandoned children, broken families, well-intentioned adults who didn't understand the complexity of what they were proposing to do. Mr. Montgomery, Sophia, she greeted, gesturing towards uncomfortable chairs in front of a scratched table. Thank you for coming. Edward immediately noticed the social worker's formal, almost cold tone. He knew that posture. It was the same one he used when he suspected adversaries in corporate negotiations. Sophia, sweetie, Dr. Beatrice addressed the girl directly. I'd like you to tell me how you met Mr. Montgomery. Sophia looked nervously at Edward before replying. He was crying on the street, just like I do when I'm cold. I offered him my blanket. And what happened next? He took me to a very nice hotel with a big bed and yummy food. And today he helped me look for my grandma. Dr. Beatrice made notes in a thick folder. Sophia, do you feel safe with Mr. Montgomery? Very safe, Sophia replied without hesitation. He's as kind as Grandma was. Edward felt a wave of emotion, but maintained a controlled expression. He knew he was being watched and judged with every reaction. Mr. Montgomery, the social worker turned her attention to him. Can you explain why you didn't immediately notify authorities about finding an unaccompanied child? I was in shock, Edward replied honestly. I had just lost my wife, and finding Sophia on the street, it was instinctive to want to help her immediately. I understand your loss and my condolences, but protocol exists for a reason. Vulnerable children must be immediately referred to the proper authorities. Would you leave a 7-year-old child alone on the street on a winter night while you filled out forms? Dr. Beatrice stiffened. Mr. Montgomery, I'm not questioning your kindness. I'm questioning your judgment. You have no experience with children. You're grieving a recent loss, and you made an impulsive decision that could have serious consequences. Sophia tugged at Edward's arm. Mr. Montgomery, is the lady mad at me? No, sweetie, Edward replied softly. She's just doing her job, which is to make sure children like you are safe. I need to be honest, Dr. Beatrice continued. Your situation is irregular. Sophia needs specialized care, therapy to process the loss of her grandma, and a structured environment. Not a single man grieving without parental experience. What if I'm willing to provide all of that? Therapy, educational support, a structured environment. Money doesn't solve all problems, Mr. Montgomery. Sophia needs emotional stability, something you frankly cannot offer right now. Edward felt anger rise, but controlled himself. Dr. Beatrice, with all due respect, how can you judge my emotional stability without knowing me? Because I know the profile. Successful men, used to solving problems with financial resources, who believe they can save a traumatized child. It usually doesn't last 6 months before they realize a child isn't a charity project. That's prejudice, Edward said, his voice hardening. Sophia began to fidget in her chair. Please don't fight because of me. Dr. Beatrice softened her tone slightly. Sophia, no one is fighting. We're just talking about what's best for you. I know what's best for me, Sophia said with surprising firmness for her age. It's staying with someone who treats me well, lets me draw, and doesn't let me be cold or hungry. Sweetie, Mr. Montgomery has a very busy life. He works a lot, travels, has responsibilities. You would need someone who can dedicate full time to caring for you. I can change my routine, Edward interjected. I can hire help, reduce travel, make any necessary adjustments. And for how long? Until the novelty wears off? Until you realize that raising a traumatized child is more complex than managing businesses. Edward took a deep breath, struggling to control his frustration. Dr. Beatrice, may I ask what your alternative is? Where would Sophia stay if not with me? We have a specialized shelter for children with a history of abandonment. Hope House. Notice, it's a reputable institution with qualified professionals, other children in similar situations. Sophia shrank in her chair. I don't want to go to a place with strangers. They won't be strangers for long, Sophia, and there are other children there who will understand what you've been through. But I don't want other children. I want to stay with Mr. Montgomery. Dr. Beatrice closed the folder with finality. Mr. Montgomery, I'll be clear. Sophia will remain in temporary state custody until her situation is resolved. You can begin the adoption eligibility process, but that will take months, perhaps years. Edward felt the floor collapse beneath his feet. You can't just take Sophia. From me, she's not an object to be redistributed. I can and I will. It's my legal responsibility to ensure her well-being. Sophia began to cry silently, clutching Edward's arm. Please don't take me away from him. I promise to be good. Edward's heart broke at Sophia's desperate plea. In less than 48 hours, she had lost her grandma and now faced the possibility of losing the only person who showed genuine care for her. Dr. Beatrice, Edward said, his voice charged with contained emotion. I beg you to reconsider. Give me a chance to prove I can take good care of Sophia. Mr. Montgomery, my decision is made. Sophia will be transferred to Hope House today. But as the social worker spoke, Sophia did something unexpected. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and extended it to Dr. Beatrice. Can I show you something? It was a drawing she had made in Henry's office. Edward, Sophia, and a woman, with wings clearly representing her grandma in heaven, all smiling together. Grandma told me that when I found a good family, I'd know it in my heart. My heart told me that Mr. Montgomery is my family now. The drawing touched something deep in Dr. Beatrice, but she maintained her professional stance. However, Edward noticed a hesitation in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a small crack in her absolute certainty about what would be best for Sophia. The silence in the Child Protective Services office was broken by the shrill ring of a cell phone. Dr. Beatrice answered with an irritated expression, but her posture changed drastically as the conversation progressed. Edward watched her face harden, then show shock, and finally genuine concern. Understood. Yes, he's here with me now. No, that's not possible. Are you sure? When did this happen? She hung up and looked at Edward with a completely different expression, no longer suspicion, but urgency. Mr. Montgomery, information has just come in that completely changes our situation. A man appeared at University Hospital an hour ago, claiming to be Sophia's biological father. Edward felt his blood run cold. What do you mean? Sophia said she didn't know her father. He claims he left Sophia with her grandma a few years ago but always maintained contact. He brought documents that appear to prove paternity. Sophia, who had stopped crying to listen to the conversation, frowned. I don't have a father. Grandma always said my father left before I was born. Sweetie, sometimes grandmas protect children from difficult truths, Dr. Beatrice gently explained. He says he lived in another city, working, and that he used to visit you regularly. That's not true, Sophia exclaimed. I remember everything. I've never seen that man in my life. Edward felt a fierce protective instinct surge within him. Dr. Beatrice, what kind of documents did he present? A birth certificate listing him as the father, some old photos, and, well, he knew specific details about Sophia that would be hard to know without living with her. What details? Edward asked suspiciously. He knew about her artistic talent, about her grandma's brooch, even about the blanket she carries. Edward and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances. How could a complete stranger know such intimate information? Where is he now? Edward asked. On his way here, he insisted on seeing Sophia immediately. Sophia abruptly stood up from her chair. I don't want to see any fake father. He's not my dad. Sophia, we need to resolve this legally, Dr. Beatrice said, but her voice showed less certainty than before. If he really is your biological father, he has legal rights over you. And what if he isn't? Edward questioned. What if he's someone who found out about Sophia through the newspaper coverage of the case? My name is public. Sophia's situation has also become public. Dr. Beatrice seemed to consider this possibility for the first time. Do you think someone could be taking advantage of the situation? I don't know, but too many coincidences make me suspicious. An absentee father for 7 years appears exactly when Sophia gains public visibility alongside a millionaire businessman. Before Dr. Beatrice could reply, the door opened. A disheveled man, about 40 years old, with greasy hair and ill-fitting clothes, entered the room accompanied by a well-dressed lawyer. Where's my daughter? The man asked dramatically, addressing Sophia directly. Daddy's finally here to get you, princess. Sophia instinctively recoiled, hiding behind Edward. I don't know you, she said in a trembling voice. Of course you do. Remember when I took you to the park, when I taught you how to draw? The man insisted, approaching closer. My grandma taught me how to draw, not you, Sophia cried out. The man's lawyer interjected. I'm Alex Miller. I represent Mr. Roger Smith, Sophia's biological father. We have all the necessary documents here to prove paternity. Edward studied the man named Roger with the eyes of an experienced negotiator. Something was definitely wrong. His body language, his eyes that didn't meet Sophia's directly, the way he spoke about her as if following a script. May I see those documents? Edward asked. Mr. Miller hesitated. I don't see why a third party would need to examine private family documents. Because this third party has been responsible for Sophia's well-being for the past 2 days, Edward firmly replied. Dr. Beatrice extended her hand. I need to see the documents to assess the situation. As she examined the papers, Edward watched Roger try to interact with Sophia. The man clearly didn't know how to behave with a child. His gestures were mechanical. His words sounded forced. Sophia, remember the song I used to sing to you to sleep? Roger tried. I don't remember because you never sang to me, Sophia replied, clutching Edward more firmly. Of course I did. It was that lullaby. Sophia looked at Edward with an expression of utter strangeness. Grandma always sang Rockabye Baby. To me to sleep. This man doesn't even know which song. Edward felt his suspicions confirmed. Roger didn't know intimate details of Sophia's life. He had been briefed on general information, but not on the small particulars. Only someone who lived with her would know. Dr. Beatrice, Edward said, I'd like to ask Mr. Smith a few questions. I don't see the need, Mr. Miller quickly interjected. The documents speak for themselves. Then why the fear of simple questions? Edward pressed. Mr. Smith, can you tell me Sophia's favorite toy? Roger hesitated. She likes dolls. I don't have dolls, Sophia said, confused. I like to draw. And what was Sophia's favorite treat that your grandma used to make? Edward continued. Chocolate fudge balls, Roger quickly replied. Coconut candy, Sophia corrected, looking at the man with increasing suspicion. Grandma made coconut candy every Sunday. Dr. Beatrice watched the interaction with increasing interest. Her experience with children told her that Sophia was being genuine in her rejection of the man, and Roger's incorrect answers were concerning. Mr. Smith, she said, can you explain why Sophia doesn't recognize you if you maintained regular contact? She was traumatized by the loss of her mother. Her grandma. Roger quickly corrected himself, but the slip did not go unnoticed. Edward and Dr. Beatrice exchanged significant glances. Mr. Miller realized the situation was spiraling out of control and tried to regain control of the conversation. Look, we have legal documents here. Whatever the emotional situation, the law is clear about paternal rights. The law is also clear about falsified documents, Edward said dryly. Are you implying that? I'm implying that I will request a full investigation into the authenticity of these documents and into Mr. Smith's true intentions. Sophia approached Dr. Beatrice and whispered something in her ear. The social worker nodded and addressed Roger. Mr. Smith, Sophia told me her grandma always told a specific story about why her father never appeared. Can you tell me that story? Roger became visibly nervous. I don't know what story you're talking about. Sophia looked at Edward with tear-filled eyes, but this time not from sadness, from fear. He's not my dad, Mr. Montgomery. This man wants to take me away from you. And at that moment, Edward realized that what had started as a simple temporary custody had turned into something much more dangerous, a legal battle that could take Sophia out of his life forever. Edward's office had never experienced such a frenzy of activity. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at Child Protective Services, and every desk was covered with documents, computers displayed complex spreadsheets, and phones rang incessantly. Henry coordinated a team of 6 specialized lawyers, 2 private investigators, and a document expert. Sophia remained by Edward's side, drawing in a giant sketch pad he had bought especially for her. Her drawings had grown darker in recent days. Figures of menacing men chasing a small girl, dark clouds covering happy houses. Edward perceived that, despite her apparent courage, she was deeply shaken by the situation. "Edward," Henry approached with a folder in his hand. "We just received the first report from the investigator. You're going to want to hear this." Sophia looked up from her drawing. "Is it good news or bad news?" "We don't know yet, sweetie," Edward replied honestly, "but we'll find out together." Henry opened the folder and began to read. Roger Smith, 42 years old, criminal history of minor offenses, fraud, document forgery, attempted extortion. Never registered in Fairview, never worked in the area, and there's no medical record of him during the period he claimed to be visiting Sophia. Edward felt a mix of relief and anger. So, he's a criminal, trying to take advantage of the situation. "It gets worse," Henry continued. "Our investigator discovered he was approached by someone a week ago, someone who offered him money to pose as Sophia's father." "Who?" Edward asked, though he suspected the answer. "We don't know yet. But there's more. Alex Miller, the lawyer representing Roger, isn't exactly what he seems to be." Sophia stopped drawing, paying full attention to the conversation. Edward noticed that she had developed an impressive ability to understand adult conversations, a sad consequence of having to mature too quickly. "What did you find out about the lawyer?" "Alex Miller's Bar Association license has been suspended for 6 months for unethical conduct in cases involving child custody. Apparently, he has a pattern. He identifies adoption cases involving wealthy individuals, then orchestrates appearances by alleged relatives to extort money." Edward clenched his fists, fighting to control his rage. "How many children have been harmed by this scheme? Based on the records we managed to get, at least 5 cases in the last 2 years. Always the same pattern: vulnerable child, adoptive family with resources, mysterious appearance of a biological relative with questionable documents." Sophia stood up and walked to the window, watching the city below. "Mr. Montgomery, if they found out the man is fake, does that mean I can stay with you?" Edward knelt beside her. "It means we're closer to it, Sophia, but we still need to prove everything legally." "And Dr. Beatrice? Does she still want to send me to the shelter?" Henry replied, "We spoke with her yesterday. After the inconsistencies she witnessed, she's willing to consider temporary custody with Edward while the investigation proceeds, but there are conditions." "What conditions?" Edward asked. "Weekly supervision, psychological evaluations for both of you, and Sophia must begin therapy immediately to process the loss of her grandma." "I accept all conditions," Edward said without hesitation. The phone rang, and Edward's secretary announced, "Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Beatrice is on the line. She says it's urgent." Edward answered on speakerphone so Sophia could hear. "Dr. Beatrice, I hope you have good news." "Mr. Montgomery, the situation has become even more complicated. Roger and Mr. Miller approached the press. There's a news crew in front of Child Protective Services right now, and they're telling a very different version of the story." Edward felt his stomach drop. "What version?" "They're saying you're a wealthy, recently widowed man who kidnapped a vulnerable child from the street, that you're using your influence and money to prevent a family from reuniting." Sophia went pale. "They're telling lies about you on TV?" "It seems so, sweetie," Edward said, feeling his fury rise. "Henry, does this change our plans?" "Actually, it might play in our favor," Henry replied thoughtfully. "If they went to the media, it's because they know the documents won't withstand a serious investigation. It's a desperate move." Dr. Beatrice continued, "There's something else. I received a call from an investigative journalist, Marcia Davies, from Channel 7 News. She says she's been investigating Alex Miller for months for similar cases. She wants to speak with you. Is that good or bad? Sophia asked. Edward considered. In for a moment. It could be very good, Sophia. If we can show the truth to everyone, not just the judge, maybe we can prevent other children from going through what you're going through. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Beatrice added, there's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow. The judge wants to hear all parties before making a decision about Sophia's temporary custody. After hanging up, Edward sat heavily in his chair. In 1 week, his life had completely transformed. From a businessman focused only on his ventures to a man fighting for the custody of a child he barely knew, but who had become the center of his world. Sophia approached and placed her small hand on his. Mr. Montgomery, are you scared? A little, he admitted. And you? Me too, but less scared than before. Why? Because now I know you won't give up on me. And I'll never give up on you either. Edward felt his eyes fill with tears. This girl, who had lost so much, still found strength to comfort others. She had taught him more about courage in a week than he had learned in 45 years of life. Henry observed the interaction with a sad smile. Edward, I need you to know tomorrow is going to be difficult. They will attack your character, your motivations, your emotional stability. They'll try to paint you as a desperate man trying to replace the emptiness Helena left. Deceased wife with a child. So that's what they think? Edward asked. It doesn't matter what they think, Sophia said with surprising determination. What matters is what's true. And the truth is, you saved me, and now I want to save you too. Edward looked at Sophia, then at Henry, then at all the frantic activity around him. His entire life had been built on control, planning, carefully calculated strategies. But this battle was different. It wasn't about profits or losses, contracts, or competitions. It was about something much simpler and infinitely more complex, a family that had formed in the most improbable way possible, and now needed to prove to the world that true love doesn't follow conventional rules. Tomorrow, in a courtroom, their future would be decided by a judge who didn't know their stories, hadn't witnessed their connection, didn't understand that sometimes the perfect family isn't born from careful plans, but from two broken hearts, finding each other in the darkest hour. The Juvenile and Family Justice Center buzzed with activity on that cold Thursday morning. Journalists crowded the courthouse steps, television cameras were strategically positioned, and curious onlookers gathered to follow the case that had gained national attention. Edward held Sophia's hand firmly as they walked towards the entrance, shielding her from the flashes and shouted questions from reporters. Mr. Montgomery, is it true you offered money to keep the child? Sophia, how do you feel about your biological father? Do you have something to hide? Edward kept his eyes fixed forward, but felt Sophia squeeze his hand tighter. She wore a light blue dress he had bought specially for the hearing and carried her drawing portfolio. Henry had suggested her artistic talents might be relevant to the case. The courtroom was smaller than Edward expected, with dark wooden benches and a solemn atmosphere that contrasted with the media circus outside. Judge Clara Davies, 56 years old with extensive experience in family cases, presided over the session, known for her impartiality and strictness. Across the room, Roger Smith looked uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit, nervously whispering with Alex Miller. Edward noticed that the two avoided direct eye contact with him and Sophia, a clear sign they knew their charade was about to crumble. Good morning, everyone, Judge Davies began. We are here to determine the best interest of the minor Sophia Miller-Smith regarding her temporary custody. Before we begin, I would like to clarify that this hearing is about a child's well-being, not about media spectacles. She cast a stern glance at the cameras that had only been authorized to film the beginning of the session. Alex Miller stood up first. "Your Honor, my client, Roger Smith, is the biological father of the minor. He seeks only to reunite with his daughter after a period of separation forced by circumstances." "And why this period of separation, Mr. Miller?" the judge asked. "My client worked in another city, sending support to the child's mother, to the grandmother, and maintained regular contact." Sophia stirred restlessly beside Edward. She had asked to speak at the hearing, and Edward admired her courage, though he feared the experience might be too traumatic. "Mr. Smith," the judge addressed the man directly, "can you tell me the last time you saw Sophia before this week?" Roger hesitated. "It was a few months ago. I visited regularly, but, Your Honor," Henry respectfully interrupted, "I would like to present evidence that contradicts that statement." The judge nodded for him to proceed. Henry presented a series of documents. Sophia's medical records that did not mention any present father, school records where only the grandmother was listed as guardian, and sworn testimonies from neighbors who had never seen Roger in the area. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Roger Smith has a criminal history of document forgery and was approached by third parties to assume this false identity." Alex Miller jumped from his chair. "Objection! These are baseless accusations intended to defame my client." "They are not baseless," the judge said calmly, "if there are documents to prove them. Mr. Castle, proceed." Henry presented the private investigator's report, photographs of Roger meeting with suspicious individuals, and financial records showing unexplained payments into his bank account. Sophia tugged at Edward's sleeve. "Can I speak now?" Edward looked at Henry, who nodded. "Your Honor, Sophia would like to address the court." "Of course, sweetie," the judge said gently. "Come up here." Sophia walked to the front of the room with firm steps, carrying her drawing portfolio. Her voice was clear and determined when she began to speak. "I've never seen this man before in my life," she said, pointing at Roger. "My grandma always told me my daddy left before I was born and never came back. She didn't lie to me." "Sophia," the judge asked softly, "how are you so sure your grandma wasn't protecting you?" "Because she told me everything. When we didn't have money for food, she told me. When she was sick, she told me. She always said family doesn't have to be a lie." Sophia opened her portfolio and pulled out a drawing she had made the night before. "Can I show you something?" It was a detailed drawing of her life with her grandma, the two of them making treats in the kitchen, reading books together, grandma braiding her hair. In one corner, there was a male figure covered by a dark cloud. "That's my real dad," Sophia explained, pointing to the shadowy figure. "Grandma said he was a sad person who didn't know how to love. But that man there," she pointed at Roger, "isn't sad, he's a liar." The room fell into complete silence. Even the journalist stopped writing. "And Mr. Montgomery?" the judge asked. Sophia turned the page and showed another drawing. Edward and her walking together under a starry sky with an angelic female figure, clearly the grandma, smiling from heaven. "He saved me when I was coldest and most scared in my life. And I saved him too, because he was crying alone on the street. Grandma always said family is when people save each other." Edward felt tears stream down his face. This 7-year-old girl had just defined family in a way he had never considered. "Your Honor," Roger abruptly stood up. "I can't do this anymore." Alex Miller tried to stop him, but Roger pushed him away. "That girl is right. I'm not her father. Someone paid me to pretend I was. I needed the money, but she doesn't deserve this." The uproar in the room was immediate. Alex Miller tried to control the damage, But Roger himself was publicly confessing. "Who paid you?" the judge asked severely. "I don't know their real name. A man approached me, said there was a lot of money involved, that I just had to pretend for a few weeks." The judge gavelled several times to restore order. "Mr. Miller, your client has just admitted to conspiracy and fraud. This hearing is suspended while authorities investigate these allegations." But before she could continue, the courtroom door opened. An elegant woman rushed in, followed by a man in an expensive suit. "Your Honor," the woman said, "I'm Marcia Davies, an investigative journalist. I have crucial information about this case that cannot wait." The judge hesitated. "Miss Davies, this is highly irregular. Your Honor, we've discovered who is behind this fraud, and the person responsible is in this room right now." Everyone turned, searching the room, while Sophia instinctively moved closer to Edward. The revelation about to come would change everything they thought they knew about the case. Marcia Davies walked purposefully to the center of the room, carrying a bulky folder and a digital recorder. Her 20 years of investigative journalism had taught her to recognize complex schemes, but this case had revealed layers of corruption that shocked even her veteran experience. "Your Honor," she began, "for 3 months I've been investigating a network of document forgery and extortion that specifically targets adoption cases involving affluent families. Alex Miller is just a small piece of this operation." The judge looked sternly at Mr. Miller, who had visibly paled. "Continue, Ms. Davies." "The true mastermind behind this network is someone with privileged access to information about adoption processes, someone who can manipulate official documents and intimately knows the legal system." Edward held Sophia closer to him, sensing that a devastating revelation was coming. The girl squeezed his hand, her big eyes fixed on the journalist. "During my investigation, I discovered that this person has been orchestrating fake cases for over 2 years, always following the same pattern, identifying wealthy families interested in adoption, then creating fake biological relatives to extort money or blackmail the families." Marcia opened her folder and pulled out a series of photographs. These images were taken last week, showing secret meetings between Mr. Miller, Roger Smith, and the person who truly runs this operation. She placed the photographs on the judge's desk. Edward couldn't see clearly, but he noticed that Judge Davies looked visibly shocked as she examined the images. "Your Honor," Marcia continued, "the person responsible for this fraud is sitting in this courtroom right now." A tense silence filled the air. Edward looked around, examining every face present. Besides them, there were only court staff, a few authorized journalists, and "It can't be," Edward murmured, following Marcia's gaze. "Dr. Beatrice Almeida," Marcia said clearly, "social worker for 12 years, with complete access to the files of vulnerable children, responsible for evaluating adoptive families, and the true mind behind this criminal network." Dr. Beatrice abruptly stood from her chair. "This is absurd. I am a dedicated public servant. How dare you?" "Dr. Beatrice," Marcia interrupted, "I have here recordings of your phone conversations with Mr. Miller, bank records showing regular payments into your account, and testimonies from 3 families who were victims of identical schemes coordinated by you." Sophia looked confusedly at Edward. "Mr. Montgomery, is the lady who wanted to send me to the shelter a bad person?" Edward felt nauseous processing the information. The woman who had judged his ability to care for Sophia, who had questioned his motivations, who had threatened to separate them. This same woman was the criminal behind the entire scheme. "How did you find out?" Judge Davies asked Marcia. "I started to notice a pattern in the cases, always the same social worker involved, always wealthy families as targets, always relatives appearing at the right time. But what really caught my attention was her reaction to Edward and Sophia's case. Marcia turned to the pair. Dr. Almeida was furious when Roger confessed, not because justice was being served, but because her scheme was publicly crumbling. Dr. Beatrice tried to move towards the door, but two bailiffs blocked her exit. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I've worked with abandoned children for years. I see wealthy families who think they can buy anything, including children. I just balance the situation by robbing these children of the chance to have true families," Edward asked, his voice filled with indignation. "You don't understand. Men like you appear, make promises, and then abandon the children when the novelty wears off. I protected these children." Sophia released Edward's hand and walked towards Dr. Beatrice. Everyone in the room tensed, not knowing what to expect. "Who were you protecting?" Sophia asked with impressive clarity for her 7 years. "You wanted to send me away from the only person who made me feel safe after Grandma died. You brought a lying man who scared me. How is that protecting me?" Dr. Beatrice was speechless at Sophia's simple but devastating question. "Do you know what happens when adults decide what's best for children without asking the children?" Sophia continued. "The children get lost and scared, just like I did when you said I couldn't stay with Mr. Montgomery." Edward approached and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder, proud of her courage, but concerned that the situation might be too traumatic for her. Judge Davies struck her gavel. "Dr. Beatrice Almeida, you are under arrest for conspiracy, document forgery, extortion, and abuse of authority. Officers, please escort her out." As Dr. Beatrice was led from the room in handcuffs, she shouted at Edward, "You'll get tired of her in 6 months. You all get tired." Sophia squeezed Edward's hand. "She's wrong." "Right, Mr. Montgomery. You won't get tired of me." "Never, Sophia," Edward replied, kneeling to be at her eye level. "True family doesn't get tired of each other. True family grows stronger together." Marcia approached them. "Mr. Montgomery, Sophia, I'd like to speak with you after the hearing. This story needs to be told. There are other children who have been harmed by this scheme, other families that have been separated." Judge Davies regained control of the hearing. "Given the extraordinary events that have just unfolded, I will make an immediate decision regarding Sophia's custody." Edward held his breath. Despite all the truth that had been revealed, he knew judicial decisions could be unpredictable. It is clear to this court that Sophia Miller-Smith was the victim of an elaborate criminal manipulation. It is equally clear that she found in Edward Montgomery not just a protector, but a true family. Sophia smiled for the first time in days. "Therefore, I grant temporary custody of Sophia to Edward Montgomery, with minimal monthly supervision, while the formal adoption process proceeds through the appropriate channels." The room erupted in applause from journalists and observers. Sophia threw herself into Edward's arms, finally allowing herself to cry, but this time tears of joy and relief. Henry approached with tears in his eyes. "Edward, you did it. You really did it." But as he embraced Sophia, Edward knew the true journey was just beginning. They had won the legal battle, but building a family, a real family based on love, trust, and mutual care, would be the true test that awaited them. 2 weeks after the hearing, Edward's mansion had transformed from a silent, melancholic house into a home full of life. Children's laughter echoed through corridors that once knew only the sound of his lonely footsteps. Sophia's drawings decorated the office walls. The refrigerator, and even some formal paintings, had been replaced by her colorful works of art. Edward watched Sophia in the garden through the kitchen window, where she had set up a small outdoor studio. She painted with watercolors, focused on a portrait of her grandma she had started the week before. Dr. Paul Thompson, the child therapist Edward had hired, said art was helping Sophia process her loss in a healthy way. "Dad, Edward!" Sophia shouted from the garden, Come see, I finished Grandma's portrait. Edward went out to the garden, where Sophia proudly showed off her work. It was impressive, not just technically for a 7-year-old, but emotionally. She had captured not only her Grandma's physical appearance, but her kindness, her wisdom, the way her eyes smiled even when her mouth was serious. It's beautiful, Sophia. Your grandma would be very proud. I think she is proud, Sophia said, looking up at the sky. Sometimes I feel her helping me choose the right colors. In recent days, Edward had learned that raising a traumatized child was far more complex than any business he had ever managed. There were nights when Sophia woke up screaming, reliving the abandonment on the street. There were times when she tested limits, as if expecting him to give up on her at any moment. But there were also moments of pure joy, like when she taught him how to make coconut candy using the recipe she remembered from her grandma, or when she completely reorganized his office to make it happier, or when she fell asleep on the couch during movies and he carried her to her room, feeling truly needed for the first time in years. Dad Edward, Sophia said, cleaning her brushes, Dr. Thompson asked if you can come to my session today. He wants to talk to both of us together. Edward nodded. Family therapy sessions had become an important part of their lives. Initially reluctant to talk about his own feelings, Edward had discovered that opening up emotionally was essential to helping Sophia heal. At Dr. Thompson's clinic, a sunny afternoon filtered through the windows of the cozy room. Sophia sat on the floor with paper and pencils, as she always did during sessions, while Edward took his usual armchair. Sophia, Dr. Thompson began, you've talked a lot about family in our conversations. Can you tell me what family means to you now? Sophia paused her drawing and thought carefully. Family is when people worry about each other every day, not just sometimes. It's when you're scared and someone hugs you. It's when you do something wrong and the person gets sad, but doesn't leave. Edward felt his heart clench. Without realizing it, Sophia had described exactly what he felt for her. And Edward, Dr. Thompson turned to him, how has this transition been for you, from single businessman to father of a 7-year-old? Terrifying, Edward admitted. I never imagined I could love someone so intensely in such a short time, but I've also never felt so complete. Complete how? My life with Helena was good, but it was a life built for 2 adults. With Sophia, I discovered parts of myself I didn't even know existed. Patience I never had, creativity that was dormant, the ability to enjoy simple things. Sophia looked up from her drawing. Dad, Edward, you completed me too. Before I met you, I felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Now I feel whole. Dr. Thompson smiled. You both have made remarkable progress. Edward, you've overcome your tendency to try and control everything and learned to adapt to a child's needs. Sophia, you've learned to trust again, even after so many losses. But there's still work to do, Edward said. Sometimes I feel lost. I don't know if I'm making the right decisions for her. No parent knows, Dr. Thompson replied. The difference between biological and adoptive parents isn't love. It's that adoptive parents often demand more of themselves, thinking they need to be perfect to deserve their children. Sophia showed her drawing. It was Edward and her, planting a tree together with deep roots spreading into the soil below. Why a tree, Sophia? Dr. Thompson asked. Because trees grow slowly, but they get very strong. And their roots all mix up underground, so they're never alone. Edward looked at the drawing with admiration. Sophia, may I ask you something important? She nodded. Would you like me to officially adopt you? For us to be a legal family, not just in our hearts? Sophia's eyes filled with tears of joy. Does that mean I can call you Dad? It means you can call me whatever you want, and I'll always be your family forever. Sophia threw herself into his arms. "Dad Edward, can I start calling you that now?" "You can," Edward replied, his voice choked with emotion. Dr. Thompson observed the scene with professional satisfaction, but also with genuine affection for these two who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal. "There's one more thing I need to discuss with you," Dr. Thompson said after the initial emotion passed. "Sophia, you've been talking about wanting to help other children who went through what you did. Can you tell me more about that?" Sophia wiped her tears and straightened up. "There are a lot of kids on the street like I was, and there are bad grown-ups who lie about them, like what happened to me. I want to help them find real families." Edward looked at Sophia with pride. "Actually, Dr. Thompson, we've been talking about this at home." Sophia had an amazing idea. "What idea?" "She wants us to create an art center for vulnerable children, a place where they can express themselves through drawing and painting, and where families interested in adoption can get to know them naturally." Dr. Thompson was impressed. "That's a brilliant idea. Art therapy is extremely effective for traumatized children. And the best part," Sophia added excitedly, "is that when kids draw, they show who they really are. Then families can see if they truly match." Edward smiled. "My daughter wants to change the country's adoption system." "And why not?" Dr. Thompson replied. "Sometimes the best changes come from those who have lived the problem firsthand." As they left the clinic that afternoon, Edward reflected on how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, his biggest problem was which company to acquire. Now, his biggest challenge was deciding whether or not Sophia should have a dog. She had been campaigning relentlessly for 2 weeks, but for the first time since Helena's death, Edward felt he had a purpose beyond himself. He had a daughter to raise, an art center to build, and a future full of possibilities he had never imagined. "Dad Edward," Sophia said as they walked to the car, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for saving me that cold night," he replied. "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about DNA, it's about choice." The day of the final adoption hearing arrived with an unexpected storm. Heavy rain lashed at the mansion windows as Edward helped Sophia get dressed in. The special outfit they had chosen together, a red dress with small embroidered flowers that she said reminded her of her grandma's treats. Her hair was held back with the gold brooch she had inherited from her grandma, and she carried a new portfolio filled with drawings she had made especially to show the judge. "Dad Edward," Sophia said, watching the rain from the window, "do you think it's a bad sign?" Edward knelt beside her, gently adjusting the brooch in her hair. "Do you think it is?" "I don't know. Grandma always said rain washes away sad things and makes everything new, but it also makes noise and is scary." "And how do you feel today? Scared or ready for new things?" Sophia thought carefully, as she always did with important questions. A little of both, but more ready for new things. In the car, on the way to the courthouse, Sophia was quieter than usual. Edward could see in the rearview mirror that she was nervously doodling in her sketch pad. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" "Our family," she replied without looking up. "But it's not coming out right." "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to draw forever. How do I draw that we'll never be separated again?" Edward felt a lump in his throat. Despite all the months together, Sophia still carried the deep fear of abandonment that all traumatized children face. "Sophia, look at me." She lifted her dark eyes, still moist with anxiety. "Remember the first night we spent together at the hotel? You asked me if I was going to leave while you took a bath." She nodded. "And what did I say? That you'd be there when I came out and when I woke up. And was I? Yes. Every day since then, have I been where I said I'd be? Yes. Then, why would today be any different?" Sophia smiled for the first time that morning, because it won't be. At the courthouse, a smaller crowd awaited them. The media frenzy had subsided, but there were still some journalists interested in following the conclusion of the story that had touched the country. Marcia Davies was there, smiling encouragingly at Sophia. The courtroom looked different that day, warmer, less intimidating. Judge Davies had decorated her bench with some drawings Sophia had sent over the months, a kindness that deeply touched Edward. "Good morning, Sophia, Edward," the judge greeted warmly. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Sophia admitted honestly, "but happy nervous, not sad nervous." "And you, Edward?" "Grateful," he replied simply. "Grateful to have found Sophia, grateful that the system worked in the end, grateful to be here today." The judge smiled. "Over the past few months, I have closely followed the progress of both of you. I've received reports from Dr. Thompson, from the new social worker assigned to the case, and even letters of support from neighbors, employees, and people who have witnessed your transformation." She opened a folder. "Sophia, would you like me to read one of these letters to you?" Sophia nodded curiously. "This one is from Roberto, the receptionist at the Grand Regent Hotel, where you first met. I've worked in hospitality for 20 years and have never seen a relationship as genuine as Edward and Sophia's. That first night, I saw a broken man find purpose in caring for a child, and a lost child find security in trusting again. They saved each other." Sophia smiled, remembering the kind man who always greeted them when they visited the hotel. "And this one," the judge continued, "is from Dr. Carla Santos from the hospital. In 15 years working with vulnerable children, I have rarely seen such a successful adaptation. Sophia has blossomed under Edward's care, and he has discovered a parental capacity he perhaps didn't even know he possessed." Edward felt his eyes well up with tears. "But the letter that touched me most," the judge said, "came from an unexpected source." She pulled a different sheet from the folder. "This is from one of the children at Hope House Shelter, where Sophia was almost placed. A 9-year-old girl named Isabella wrote, 'Sophia visits us every week with her new dad. She teaches us how to draw and always says we'll find our family too. Because of her, I believe it's true. She proved that miracles exist.'" Sophia was surprised. "Isabella wrote that?" "She did. And she wasn't the only child who mentioned how your visits have given them hope." Edward looked at Sophia with immense pride. His daughter had transformed her own traumatic experience into a source of hope for other children. "Sophia," the judge addressed her directly, "6 months ago, you were a scared, lonely child with no family. Today, you are here with someone who loves you unconditionally, in a safe home, helping other children. How does that make you feel?" Sophia stood up, as she had learned to do when she wanted to say something important. "It makes me feel like Grandma was right." "About what?" "She always said that when bad things happen, it's because good things are coming. The bad thing was her having to leave. But the good thing was me meeting my dad, Edward." The judge discreetly wiped away a tear. "Edward, is there anything you would like to say before we make the final decision?" Edward stood, feeling the weight of the moment. "Your Honor, when I met Sophia, I was lost in my own grief. I thought I had nothing left to give anyone. She taught me that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies. I'm not here today asking to adopt Sophia because I want to save a child. I'm here because she already saved me, and now we want to save others together. Sophia, do you have anything to add?" Sophia took a paper from her portfolio, a drawing she had finished, in the car. It was a house with 2 figures in front holding hands, with visible roots growing deeply into the soil beneath them. In the sky, a smiling female figure was surrounded by stars. "This is us," she explained. "The roots show that we're planted together forever now, and Grandma is watching over us from heaven, happy because I'm not alone anymore." The room fell into absolute silence. Even the journalists had stopped writing, touched by the profound simplicity of Sophia's words. Judge Davies gently struck her gavel. "Sophia Miller-Smith, Edward Montgomery, it is with immense joy that I legally finalize what has existed in your hearts for months. Edward, you are officially Sophia's adoptive father. Sophia, you are now legally Edward's daughter. May this family, born of love and forged by adversity, be blessed with many years of happiness together." Sophia ran into Edward's arms, and for the first time in months, he picked her up without worrying about protocols or appearances. He was her father, she was his daughter, and nothing else mattered. "We did it, Dad," Sophia whispered in his ear. "We did it, my daughter," he replied, using the words that had lived in his heart for so long for the first time officially. As they left the courthouse to the emotional applause of those present, Edward looked up at the stormy sky that was now breaking open, letting rays of sunshine through the clouds. Sophia was right. The rain had washed everything away, and now something completely new was beginning. 3 months after the official adoption, Edward observed through his new office window a scene he could never have imagined a year earlier. In the spacious garden of the Hope Art Center, dozens of children ran, played, and painted under the careful supervision of specialized educators. Sophia, now 8 years old, led a group of 5 younger children in a watercolor workshop, her sweet voice explaining techniques she had learned in recent months. "Remember," Sophia told the children around her, "when you paint what's in your heart, the people who are going to be your families can see who you really are." The Hope Art Center had become a reality thanks to the partnership between Edward, the reformed social services system after Dr. Almeida's scandal, and several families who had gone through successful adoption processes. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of formal interviews and artificial meetings, children and interested families met through natural artistic activities. Henry entered the office carrying a stack of documents. "Edward, we have good news. 3 more families were approved this month, and the program is being considered for implementation in other states." "And the children? How are they adjusting?" "Isabella was adopted by the Rodriguez family last week. Michael found a family who loves soccer as much as he does. And little Anna?" Henry smiled. "Anna is going to stay with that couple of teachers she met during the pottery workshop." Edward felt a deep satisfaction. Each child who found a family was a personal victory, proof that the system could work when based on genuine connection instead of cold bureaucracy. "Daddy!" Sophia ran into the office, her hands still covered in paint. "You have to see something." She pulled him into the garden, where a new girl, about 6 years old, had painted an impressive portrait. It was the face of an older woman, clearly painted from memory, with details that showed as much love as longing. "This is Marina," Sophia explained. "She arrived yesterday. She lost her mom just like I lost my grandma. Look how well she paints." Edward knelt beside Marina, a shy child with big eyes and curly hair. "Is that your mum?" he asked gently. Marina nodded, unable to speak. "She was very beautiful," Edward said. "And you painted her in a way that shows how much you loved each other?" Marina's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled shyly. "You know," Sophia said, sitting next to Marina, "when I first came here, I couldn't talk about my grandma without crying either. But Dad Edward taught me that crying isn't bad. It's just a way for your heart to say it loved a lot." Edward watched his daughter comfort another traumatized child and felt his chest swell with pride. Sophia had transformed her own pain into compassion for others. Dr. Thompson approached the group. "Edward, I need to talk to you about Sophia." They moved away from the children slightly. Is something wrong? Edward asked, always concerned about his daughter's emotional well-being. On the contrary, Sophia has made extraordinary progress. She has fully processed her grandmother's loss, developed healthy coping mechanisms, and most importantly, she has found a purpose that strengthens her instead of consuming her. Edward looked at Sophia, who was now helping Marina clean the brushes. In fact, Dr. Thompson continued, I'd like to suggest that you consider formalizing Sophia's involvement here at the center. She has a natural gift for connecting with traumatized children. Do you think that would be healthy for her? Wouldn't it be constantly reliving her own trauma? Edward, unprocessed trauma destroys us. Processed trauma, transformed into purpose, strengthens us. Sophia has turned her experience into a life mission. This is resilience at its highest level. That night, at home, Edward and Sophia prepared dinner together, a tradition they had established in the first few days after the adoption. Sophia made a salad while Edward cooked pasta, and they talked about their day. Dad, can I tell you a secret? Sophia said, carefully seasoning the tomatoes. Of course, my love. Sometimes I dream about Grandma, and she's always smiling. Do you know what she tells me in my dreams? What? That she knew you would find me. That she asked the stars to send someone special to take care of me when she couldn't anymore. Edward stopped stirring the sauce, too emotional to speak immediately. And guess what else, Sophia continued. I told her that you're not just someone special who takes care of me. You're my real dad. From my heart. Sophia, Edward said, kneeling to be at her level. You know I feel the same way, right? You're not a child I adopted. You're my daughter. As if I had waited for you my whole life. Sophia hugged him tightly. I know, and do you know how I know? How? Because when you found me crying on the street, you were crying too. People who are real family cry about the same things. After dinner, they sat in the living room, now decorated with a harmonious mix of Edward's classical paintings and Sophia's vibrant artworks. She was working on a special project, a drawing book about children finding families. Who is that book for? Edward asked. For children who are still waiting, Sophia explained. So they know that real families exist and that they just need to wait for the right family. Edward flipped through the finished pages. Each drawing told a story of connection, of different children finding families who loved them exactly as they were. In the last finished drawing, a small girl offered a blanket to a sad man, and in the corner of the page, written in Sophia's careful handwriting, was, Sometimes you save the person you least expect. Sophia, Edward said, do you have any idea how many lives you've already changed? How many? Mine, especially. But also the children at the center, the families who found children there, all the people who read about our story in the newspapers. And did your life change for the better? She asked, though she knew the answer. Infinitely better. Before I met you, I had a lot of money, a big house, expensive cars, but I didn't have what truly matters. What truly matters? Someone to love completely, someone who loves me back, someone for whom I want to be the best version of myself every day. Sophia smiled and returned to her drawing. Dad, can I ask you a question? Always. Do you still miss Helena? Edward was surprised by the direct question but answered honestly. I do. I always will. She was very important in my life. Do you think she would have liked me? Sophia, I am absolutely certain that Helena would have loved you as much as I do. And guess what else? What? I think she and your grandma met in heaven, and they're watching over both of us together. Sophia smiled, a complete expression of peace settling on her face. I think so too. That night, as Sophia slept peacefully in her room, now truly, her room, legally and forever, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. A year ago, He was a man lost in his grief, walking alone through icy streets. Today, he was the father of an extraordinary girl who had transformed not only his life, but the lives of countless other children. The faded blanket Sophia had offered. That first night was still framed on his office wall, not as a reminder of suffering, but as a symbol of how a simple act of kindness can change the world. Beside it, there was now a photo of the adoption ceremony, where he and Sophia smiled radiantly, finally a complete and official family. Edward knew that challenges would still come. Raising a daughter would always be a constant learning experience, and the work at the Hope Arts Center would require tireless dedication. But for the first time in his life, he would not face these challenges alone. He had Sophia, and Sophia had him, and together they had built something that neither bureaucracy nor adversity could destroy: a true family based on unconditional love and conscious choice. Exactly 1 year after that cold night that changed their lives forever, Edward and Sophia walked hand in hand through St. Michael's Cemetery. Winter had arrived again, but this time they were prepared: warm coats, soft gloves, and most importantly, the warmth of each other to ward off any cold that might try to approach. Sophia carried a bouquet of white roses in one hand, and her drawing portfolio in the other. Her steps were firm and confident as they headed towards her grandma's grave, very different from the scared, lonely girl Edward had found 12 months earlier. "Grandma," Sophia said, kneeling before the simple tombstone that Edward had replaced with a more beautiful one, decorated with sculpted flowers, "I brought Dad Edward to meet you properly." Edward knelt beside his daughter, placing the flowers in the marble vase. "Mary Grace," he said respectfully, "thank you for raising such a special girl. I promise I will take good care of her forever." Sophia opened her portfolio and pulled out a new drawing, the most detailed and beautiful she had ever made. It was a portrait of 3 people: her, Edward, and a translucent female figure with wings, all holding hands under a starry sky. "I brought you a gift, Grandma. It's our complete family, you, me, and Dad Edward. You can't be here in body, but you're always here." She touched her chest, over her heart. Edward watched his daughter communicate naturally with her grandma, without excessive sadness, but with pure love and comforting longing. Dr. Thompson was right. Sophia had processed her loss exemplarily. "Grandma, I have a lot of news to tell you," Sophia continued, as if talking to someone present. "The art center that Dad and I created has already helped 53 children find their families. And remember Marina, that girl who painted just like me? She was adopted by a family of artists who loved her drawings." The wind gently swayed the surrounding trees, and Sophia smiled as if she had received an answer. "She said she's proud," Sophia translated for Edward, who smiled tenderly. "And I'm proud of you too," Edward said. "Your grandma raised a girl who is changing the world, one child at a time." They remained a few minutes in silent contemplation before heading to the second destination of that annual pilgrimage. A few feet away was Helena's grave, also decorated with fresh flowers, a tradition Edward maintained religiously. "Helena," Edward said, placing red roses, her favorite flowers, on the grave, "do you remember I always said I didn't know if I'd be a good father? Well, I found out that love is more important than experience." Sophia approached the grave with respectful curiosity. She had heard many stories about Helena, but this was the first time she visited her grave. "Hi, Helena," Sophia said shyly. "I'm Sophia. Thank you for taking such good care of Dad Edward before I arrived. He told me you two were very happy together." Edward felt his eyes fill with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude for having 2 such special people in his life, even if one was only in his memories. "Sophia," he said, "I'd like to show something to Helena." Sophia nodded and pulled another drawing from the portfolio. This one showed Edward in 2 moments. First, sad and alone, then smiling next to Sophia, with a shining female figure blessing them both from the sky. "This is Dad Edward before and after he met me," Sophia explained to Helena. "He told me you'd like to know he's happy again." Edward hugged his daughter, moved by her sensitivity in including Helena in their new life, instead of seeing her as competition or a threat. After the cemetery visits, they headed to their last destination, the street where they met. Edward had parked the car in the same spot where he had stumbled and fallen a year earlier, and they walked to the exact point of their encounter. "It was right here," Sophia said, pointing to a spot on the asphalt. "You were crying and I offered you my blanket. And you saved my life," Edward added. "We saved each other," Sophia corrected. "Remember? Family is when people save each other." Edward looked around the street, now busy with people going about their daily lives, none of them knowing that at that exact spot a miracle of human connection had occurred. "Sophia, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "If you could go back in time and change anything about how we met, what would you change?" Sophia thought carefully, as she always did with important questions. "I'd only change one thing." "What?" "I'd find you sooner," she said, smiling. "So you wouldn't have been alone and sad for so long." Edward picked Sophia up, something she still allowed occasionally, even at 8 years old, and twirled her in the air, laughing for the first time in a long time with pure joy. "You know what else?" Sophia said when he put her down. "What?" "I'm not cold anymore. Never again, since that first night at the hotel, because true family is the best blanket there is." Walking back to the car, Edward reflected on the complete transformation of their lives. His company continued to prosper, but now it was managed by a competent team that allowed him to dedicate more time to what truly mattered. The Hope Arts Center had become a national model, with branches planned in 5 states. And most importantly, he had a daughter who taught him daily about courage, compassion, and the infinite capacity of the human heart for love. "Dad," Sophia said as Edward adjusted her seatbelt in the car, "thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for fighting for me, for proving to me that family isn't about who made you, but about who chooses to stay with you forever." "Thank you for choosing." "Me too," Edward replied, "and for teaching me that sometimes the best things in life begin on the worst nights." As they drove home, a house that was now truly a home, Sophia fell asleep in the back seat, holding the faded blanket that was now more a symbol of hope than of necessity. Edward looked in the rearview mirror at his peacefully sleeping daughter and smiled. A year ago, he was a lost man walking alone through icy streets. Today, he was the father of an extraordinary girl who had transformed his pain into purpose, his loneliness into family, and his despair into hope. When they arrived home, Edward carried a sleeping Sophia to her room, covered her gently, and kissed her forehead. On her bedside table was a photo of the graduation of another Hope Arts Center cohort, 15 smiling children with their new families, all holding drawings they had made during the adoption process. In the office, Edward paused in front of the framed blanket on the wall. Beside it, he had added a small plaque with the inscription, "Sometimes the perfect family is born from the meeting of 2 broken hearts that heal each other." Outside, it began to snow lightly, the first sign of approaching winter. Edward smiled, remembering how he used to dread cold winter nights. Now, they only reminded him of how kindness can flourish in the darkest moments, and how true love can turn any storm into spring. In her room, Sophia woke briefly and smiled as she saw the snow outside the window. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered to the stars. "Thank you for sending Dad Edward to me." And in the quietness of that perfect night, Father and daughter slept peacefully, knowing they had found something that neither time nor circumstances could destroy. A family formed not by chance or biology, but by the conscious choice to love unconditionally, forever.